Rich. I'll be back.
While we're waiting for the next talk, I hate to interrupt with the diverted version of the talks with a bit of a mercenary strain, but since you're enjoying the talks, I want you to please consider making a donation to the Ephemera Society. We are in the process of a fundraising period, just like public broadcasting always is. And if you would like to support these programs, and the program that we had yesterday supporting students, the Phil Jones Fellowship, which where we invite scholars to write articles about ephemera, and supporting our mission and our goals, which are not just to support collectors, but to educate people about ephemera and how to conserve it and what it means to civilization. Please consider donating. We really need your help. And if you want to donate, there's a desk outside. You can talk to Mary Beth, you can talk to me. In the same vein, we really would love to have your help to serve on any of our boards. You can become active in the society. You don't need to go anywhere. The board work can be done by telephone. There are many different types of things we do on our boards, and so you can talk to me or someone else on the board about that if you want to learn more about that. So thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I'm Tom Horrocks. I'm a past member of the Society's Board of Directors and is one of many fans of our next presenters. Thus, it is my great pleasure and distinct honor to introduce Diane DeBlois and Robert Dalton Harris. They, of course, need no introduction to many of you in this audience. But I understand that there are some here who may not know them and are new to the Society, so it is my pleasure to perform this task. Di and Robert, well known to ephemera collectors, librarians, museum curators around the world as proprietors of aGatherin, are charter members of the Ephemera Society of America. They have devoted much of their time and promotions of ephemera and to this society. And for that, they were awarded the Society's prestigious Rickards Award, Maurice Rickards Medal in 2008. And this past year, they were given the American Philatelic Society's Luff Award for research. They have assembled several extensive collections of ephemera in various fields. And one of these collections, the one they will talk about today, is on the fascinating topic of telegraphy. In fact, we've already seen a little bit about that in Dick's talk earlier today. And how ephemera can be used to tell the story of the telegraph and its important impact. So without further ado, I introduce two long-term members of the Ephemera Society family, and I am proud to say two dear friends, Diane and Robert Harris, Diane DeBlois and Robert Harris, who will speak on sparking the imagination.
So what's the concept here? Zeus hurls his thunderbolt with an arrow of lightning.
The big idea, a special message by electricity.
And ephemera helps us to understand both the cultural preparation for and the acceptance of the idea.
News and urgency go together.
In the early 19th century, a great many American and European newspapers were called the Telegraph, implying that their news would arrive ahead of their competitors.
Sailing ships, such as this one in 1804, and steamships later in the century, were also called the Telegraph, to invoke the same idea of the expedition of special cargo, passengers and freight.
Galloping horses. And
This is before Muybridge suggested speeded messaging.
Sometimes this invoked or involved an exaggeration. No canal boat, though some of the best stagecoaches in the era would have been, no canal boat was ever pulled by 6 horses at a gallop.
And the Post Office Department did not regularly use a single galloping express post rider. The postal schedule was based on an average speed of only 4 miles per hour.
What of the speed of light?
An optical telegraph was developed in the 1790s, and this little doggerel was published even before the Schaap brothers opened their first successful line of signaling towers between Paris and Lille.
A mechanical arrangement of wooden arms was recognized and then repeated, about every 6 miles. By the 1820s, a signal along 100 stations from Paris to Toulon took 15 minutes. A signal, but a message might take 3 or 4 hours.
Now, the speed of light continued to be used to communicate, particularly in the British and American navies.
But such optical devices took time to reset for each letter or word. The key of speed was in the ease of repetition.
Now, in 1837, the American government invited proposals for, as they said, establishing a system of telegraphs for the United States.
John R. Parker's inventive semaphore system was one of the entries deemed workable enough to be published in a congressional report. Parker had been working on ship-to-shore semaphore systems for about 30 years.
Now, that same report described the entry that was handed in by Samuel Finley Breese Morse, the only proposal to use electricity, and it included an illustration, the first, of his short and long interval transmission code.
Morse, at the time, was the founder and president of the National Academy of Design, which he had helped found, and was a famous painter. He was the first professor of fine arts in this country. And he had, by this time, produced what we now today recognize as one of his greatest paintings, the Gallery of the Louvre.
Oops. On the right, he is a letter that Morse wrote to a man who wanted his son to learn painting. And Morse says that he has to take a break from his art, and he can't take on this pupil, because it is my intention to press my telegraphic invention on the attention of the government this coming season. If they will adopt it, I will again be in a situation to take up my pencil.
That's in 1842 that he wrote that letter. The government did take up his invention, paying for the successful construction of an experimental line between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore in 1844.
But despite support for the telegraph as just the latest transportation device to carry mail, federal backing ceased.
Henry Vail, a partner that Morse had secured with mechanical abilities from the Speedwell Ironworks, his family concern, published a promotional pamphlet subsequent to the completion of the experimental line, which we see in part here. Vail had helped Morse to make the first public demonstration of the telegraph in 1838, many years before. The first transmission at that time, in 1838, a patient waiter is no loser.
But Morse and Vail couldn't wait. With no government support, they had to pursue their advantage.
The code that Morse and Vail developed was adapted to cipher. Before the code, telegraphy semaphore included, was typically done with prearranged signals referring to a dictionary in which the signal would be parsed through the dictionary. But in this case, the code was pinned to the alphabet, which eased its repetition, of course. The key to secure communication of information outside of the sealed envelope would be that cipher.
But it couldn't be patented. So Morse, the artist, patented instead the register, the apparatus that recorded the electric brush marks.
This matter of making record is essential. Morse had an obsessive interest in actually making a physical mark, kind of like engraving the Ten Commandments on a plate. It was with the mark on the plate that the message would receive its actual physical embodiment, and for us, its existence as a piece of the film.
Now, a business culture organized itself around the telegraph and its industry.
Shorthand for the industry became the Morse code. People would recognize it everywhere. Here, a Utica apparatus maker repeats the code in several of these forms of advertising.
And here, two manufacturers of telegraphic apparatus do something similar with their trade cards on the back, including the Morse code.
An electromagnetic locomotive in the lower right appears in the same philosophical instrument trade catalog as telegraphic apparatus.
Now, on the upper left was something called the house printing telegraph, with typing keys arranged like a piano, and this suggests what later was turned into the teletype.
This is before the typewriter, as a matter of fact. Lower left is the Bain igniting telegraph that marked paper with sparks. Morse's apparatus appeared in other pages of the catalog.
Now, unification of the three major contenders for a standard apparatus to register the electric sparks, so that's House and Bain and Morse, preceded the Civil War.
The unification preceding our own Civil War is sometimes being suggested as an exacerbation which actually brought the Civil War to bear. Morse was often portrayed with the latest version of his patent register. Implicit was the relay to reduce the time to transmit a message quite to zero, to relay, to retransmit the message to zero.
Now, how to illustrate the telegraph? Well, consider the wires. What follows is a study in image pirating.
The apparatus from the trade catalog we saw earlier was used in another publication and then cut out of that publication to be reproduced in yet another and replaced where it had come from in ink. Wires were added to a battery as well as two wires leading to the street to suggest what was to be added to the illustration in the subsequent pre-publication.
Now, the author of that second publication donated both copies to the Franklin Institute, who had published his work.
As an aside, the Franklin Institute sold off its library, and we were the fortunate buyers of the telegraph section of the Franklin Institute library.
Now, the first pamphlet also reveals how Turnbull masked the frontispiece so that just the image could be pirated. And that, of course, suggests that he published the letter sheet on the right.
Now, we named Turnbull. He was the person who wrote the pamphlets in question. And the Franklin Institute was his publisher. The figure on the left is keying in a message. We're looking at the letter sheet, or title page, to travel over wires and go to a factory, then to a roundhouse, then to accompany a railroad, then branch away from the rails and come into another factory town where a second figure receives the message printed in dots and dashes on a strip of paper by a Morse register practically instantaneously. The relays being essential to the repetition of the weakening telegraph signal over any distance so that as far as people were concerned, the transmission time was instantaneous. It was just as good as an optical signal away across the street.
Telegraph wires began to appear prominently on business advertising images.
Letterheads often show transportation connections of a business, wagons, railways, trams, and so on. The telegraph was featured by the Philadelphia India Rubber Factory, evidently to emphasize its proximity to a ready exchange of orders and information.
And the little inset shows more clearly that there are two groups of 4 wires, each representing transmissions sent and received north and south of Philadelphia.
One of the largest makers of telegraph instruments with wire rooms on Bromfield Street in Boston included a telegraph wire connection on their billhead with the label telegraph to factory.
And the single wire, we suppose, meant that they were using the ground for return.
The telegraph poles and wires increasingly appeared in images of the American landscape, even in idealized visions of the pastoral and often quite separate from depictions of railroads.
The telegraph was a technology that could leapfrog over the much more capital-intensive railroad, a little bit like cell phones can leapfrog over landlines in certain countries and areas of other countries.
The idea that the railroad and telegraph were related in some kind of technological way refers to the right-of-way issue, railroads becoming convenient rights of way, as well as the telegraph becoming essential to railroad operation, railroad capitalization, and so forth, that Stephen Jay Gould took to extremes as president of Western Union and building a railroad empire by his leverages thereby throughout the country. That's Jay Gould. No, Jay Gould.
Sorry, that wrong. Now, in this sketch of a scene of farewell, the telegraph for local space is still the gesture, a wave of a hand.
Ordinary Americans seemed quick to grasp that the telegraph was not merely another way to communicate.
The telegraph, a modern invention, not only almost but quite annihilates distance. When a communication can be sent hundreds and thousands of miles in a moment of time, as it were. Truly it may be said with some reason that mankind have arrived almost or quite to perfection in regard to the facility with which news is transported through the country.
That almost magical erasure of distance encouraged the man to thinking. Remember the 1790 song that we opened with?
That the telegraph would tell time, conduct lightning, dry shirts, and send news.
Oh, how I wish I could mount the telegraph wire and go to Holland Patent and spend the day with my wife and babies instead of writing.
And then, if only passengers could travel by telegraph. I wonder if they won't give me a passage on the telegraph wires. In no other way shall I ever get to see you all once more. What do you think they would charge to send such a message as myself? Well, it's to be hoped they would deliver me in better shape than they do many of their dispatches, else my chance of recognition would be poor.
Regard the bottom image. The telegraph is represented by a disembodied hand with an electric pen, traveling ahead of the railroad, the steamboat ahead of the express rider, the pedestrian ahead of the sailing ship, and the tortoise.
Do you see the tortoise?
Right down in the lower right corner of the bottom slide.
Until 1883, each railroad or telegraph in the United States chose its own time standards. Every man's clock was set by the sun.
Here, telegraph company instructs its operators that the entire system would operate upon the time of the Washington office.
Of course, now when a newspaper called itself The Telegraph, it actually could promote that it was getting information received by telegraphic dispatches.
Those would have been electric telegraph dispatches. The earlier telegraph newspapers, of course, were referring to this optical semaphore. Norton in New York, the bottom image, operated a kind of internet cafe where people could go to gain access to telegraph connections using the keys themselves.
The telegraph transformed the Civil War into a strategic theater, and it was a theater that could be charted not just at the White House, but in every American home.
Such large wall maps were provided by the newspapers that received the latest telegraphic dispatches.
Instantaneous. Now, an instant involves both time and space.
The shutter on the camera could capture a slice of time. A telegraphic signal annihilated the space between different speakers.
And Morse was involved with both instantaneous processes.
After first exhibiting his telegraph, Morse learned the daguerreotyping process and taught it to two of the most famous American photographers. Right as his experimental line in 1844 was transmitting between DC and Baltimore, Anthony and Grady were setting up their separate first studios.
Now, Morse, who was 80 when he died in 1872, had become the grand old man of the electrical revolution. I sort of think he looks a little like Rob.
No medals, though.
They don't give you medals. There were no medals. The images of his old age continued to appear on ephemera for decades. The white beard, the solemn visage, the medals awarded from grateful nations who adopted his patented telegraph system, code, relay, register.
And then when another big idea attached to the telegraph in 1854, a plan to connect across the Atlantic Ocean, the financiers who plotted the project chose to insert the figure of Morse even though he wasn't at the meeting.
Henry Huntington did a portrait which is now at the State Library in New York, used to be in the Chamber of Commerce in New York City, in which Henry Huntington painted himself into such a picture.
Make that Daniel Huntington.
Daniel, thank you.
This,
Stephen J. Daniel?
yeah, that one. Now, these financiers around the globe, emphasizing that this was going to be a global telegraphic network, begun with the line across the Atlantic. This was actually a vision that Morse had had from the very beginning.
The idea is that his vision of the telegraph was so compelling that it leapfrogged all of the technical and geographical challenges, political and capital financial challenges which lay between his conception in 1832 and any of these realizations.
Now, when this grand scheme of the Atlantic Cable was first successful in 1858, that was Ireland and Nova Scotia linked by a cable under the sea by which messages could be relayed to the telegraph networks of both continents.
Americans went quite wild with celebrations, and they were quite distinct in that. The British did not nearly celebrate as well as the Americans did, including these two elaborate parades on both sides of the continent, in San Francisco and in Cincinnati, or is it Boston?
It's actually Hartford. And then even the humblest of citizens found ways to commemorate the achievement. And here there was a parade of working men in Albany. There was a dance in Montpelier.
The number of sermons which were preached in churches on this occasion, in which the advent of the telegraph was likened to a union between the celestial and terrestrial spheres. is also notable.
Then enterprising businessmen, such as Tiffany, famously, and then this guy, Eli, bought up unused portions of the cable and sold pieces as paperweights or jewelry.
And here, the thin slice of the cable, about the size of a dime, is embedded in the cover to an autograph book and backed by the label guaranteeing its authenticity.
And you can imagine how we celebrated when we bought this at this fair several years ago. Now, the telegraph opened up new careers for young men and especially for young women.
Operators soon discovered that messages did not, in fact, have to be registered. You didn't have to make the mark by a printing process because they could be discerned by the ear. People listening to the key could immediately translate the sound of the dots and dashes into an audible semblance of the message. They could also do that with that strange system that looked like the piano, with the keys and so forth. You can imagine the mechanism that a practiced listener could translate the sound of that complex mechanism into a reception of the message, bypassing the register altogether.
So educational institutions created courses to teach telegraph operating, and they promoted the excellence of their own syllabus with certificates, stationery, and business cards.
This broadside targets an interesting population, the young boys that were being invoked as an explanation for the vandalism that was being wreaked upon the wires. And this was a perennial fear of the telegraph that people would take down the wires. It was a problem, they thought, when they strung the telegraph across the country, and they feared the Indians would steal the wires. As a matter of fact, the Indians liked the wires, and they found them non-obtrusive.
They wanted the horses, forget the wires. And those wayward boys, however, could be recruited to become telegraph messengers. And this was a new possibility to relieve some of the problem of street urchins.
This board game shows boys being educated toward the new status. Boundary workers, they're called.
And other games mimic the reality of composing, transmitting, and receiving telegraph messages.
It will be found educational and well worthwhile for players to learn the telegraph code so that one player may telegraph messages to the other.
But by 1914, notice that only boys were considered to be the players in this game.
The special message of electricity had unknown limitations, so it was also interpreted by medicine.
As we saw before. In this one, the universal cause of motion in matter could cure any disease, provided the right patent apparatus was used.
Zeus hurling thunderbolts with lightning, the favorite icon of the telegraph companies, was adapted to deliver quack medical cures quickly.
Now, if the limitations of time and space were quite annihilated, why couldn't we communicate with the spirit world?
And the spirits might talk back.
During the feverish politics of the temperance movement in America, the railroad could portray a path to drunken perdition, and the only telegram that comes over the wires from the lower terminus of the road is, at the last, it biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder.
Beware your cell phones. The global reach of the telegraph could even be mocked.
Since electrical messages were aerial and ethereal, could they not be merely ephemeral?
Thank you.
So, as behooved the timekeepers here, we do have time for questions. Yeah.
It's just a comment, but if people are interested in seeing and spending, you should spend really 2 days in Paris in the 12th arrondissement to see displays of all sorts of history of French technology, including the semaphore system and all sorts of other French telegraphic inventions and other things that are related to other technology. It's the Musée aux Arts et Métiers in the 12th. It's a fabulous experience. Unlike the Smithsonian, you have the place kind of to yourself.
This is an observation that, is this in Paris?
Yes, in the 12th arrondissement.
12th arrondissement, there's a Musée des Métiers,
Aux Arts et Métiers.
Aux Arts des Métiers, and which includes all sorts of great things like the Chat Brothers inventions and the various telegraphic.
Just one other thing also, we were talking about physical ephemera before, and people may or may not know that Morse inhabited the basement of Audubon's mansion in Washington Heights in New York City, 158th and Riverside Drive, and there one winter he strung a telegraph line across the Hudson River from 2 iron towers that were built there. Remnants of that New York side tower can be located, let the snow melt, go on the internet, do your searching, and you can see where this all happened. The wire broke, it was winter time, the experiment failed, but it's a little piece of somewhat unknown history.
So this is another great tip. If you wanted to see some sort of physical ephemera or the remains thereof, Morse inhabited a house in Washington Heights in New York City for a while, and he developed a telegraph or strung a wire across the river at that point between 2 iron towers. The wire broke, but apparently the remains of one of the towers on the New York side can still be found.
It's Audubon's home.
Oh, it's at Audubon's home. Oh, well, yes, and do not forget to visit Morse's home in Poughkeepsie.
A lovely little museum between in alley, nice school, and it's well worth it.
There's a Samuel Finley Breese Morse Park in Pacific Grove, California.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's his nephew, who's best known for developing the golf courses in that area.
I couldn't help notice that some of the documents had revenue stamps on them. So how did the government take all this once the development really got going? How did they get involved in terms of taxation and revenue sharing, et cetera?
With respect to the telegraph, there was, one of the forms was subject to taxation during the Civil War, the Revenue Act of that period. The sender's form, the form that the sender would submit to be sent, would be kept on file, and it would bear a 2-cent revenue stamp, very much like a check as a receipt or other receipts during the same period. Telegraphy was also charged, telegraph companies were also charged for their rights of way. They were accountable through county tax commissioners and paying taxes for rights of way and equipment value and that sort of thing would also, beginning during the Civil War, be taxed and enter the federal revenues at that time. Based upon the Paris connection, certainly when Morse was painting the gallery in the Louvre, he was in Paris. The important point, I think, to remark is that the Louvre was only recently opened to contain all the plunder that Napoleon had taken from the rest of Europe and was there famously available to be viewed freely by the public for the first time. And there were a lot of expat Americans in Paris, James Fenimore Cooper, Stephen Jay Gould, and Samuel Finley Breese Morse. But the the opportunity to view these paintings, which were known and perhaps seen in engravings, but now for the first time to be studied, was a formative moment, a transformative moment in the way in which people thought of painting and literature, and for Morse's part, the basic conceptual ground as a professor of fine arts that gave him a feeling for what could be done if only you could send and record a message by electricity.
Yeah.
Reading about the Civil War, several different sources that Lincoln used to spend time at the telegraph office to find out what was going on in the front. I don't know which telegraph office. In the War Department. Did they I don't know.
Yeah, so this has become well known. There is a book called Lincoln and the Telegraph that Lincoln did spend an enormous amount of time in the telegraph office of the War Department. There is some thought that many of the problems of the Civil War strategies was that the telegraph was bringing in information that was not always accurate, for one thing, because it depended on people looking at the troops, and that it was such a plethora of information that it was overload and could be misinterpreted.
Yes.
Yes.
Big data.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that within the past couple months, I saw that there is the Smithsonian or something they've found a cache of these war telegrams, and they're looking for people, sourcing people to
Yeah, and that actually
to transcribe them
it's
over the internet. Is that right?
That's the Huntington.
That's the
It's the Huntington.
yes, it is. It's at the Huntington. I announced it in the e-news that the Huntington has this enormous collection of telegrams, and and they are trying to crowdsource their transcription.
Okay, well, never mind. But
No, but that's good. Yeah, thanks. Yes, Paul.
I love the image where Morse is inserted.
Yes.
But what it made me realize is that even back then, there were ways these inventing elites did know one another and were interconnected. And you can tie Edison to sort of everything. He knew Eastman and Muybridge and Morse and Graham Bell and the Lumiere brothers. These people all knew one another.
They got to know each other.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like it's a small world phenomenon, isn't
Yeah,
it?
but the most ephemeral thing that we don't have are what did they say to one another when they meet?
What hath God wrought?
Spiritual telegraph.
So the point there was that so many of these leaders in electricity actually had met one another. And wouldn't it be fascinating to know what they said to one another? What did Morse as an old man say to the young Edison? Then what did the Lumiere brothers say?
Well, fortunately, Morse wrote extensively, many letters, exchanged many letters, and there's a wonderful biography published in the last 10 years called Man of Lightning, I believe, which is probably the best biography of Morse that I've read, especially for its use of what record there is of what he would have written, and by secondhand what he might have said.
Yeah.
Technological era as outliers. We have hackers today. Is there such thing as hackers for the telegraph?
So the question is, every technology has its outliers, and we have hackers today. Were there hackers in the first telegraph systems?
In a sense, the competing telegraph apparatus makers were hacking Morse's patent, and they were Morse was trying to find something to claim so that he would be the original inspired inventor. Meanwhile, the basis upon the things which his claim rested, for example, first the register, didn't prove impervious to litigation, and so he had to change his tack to improving the register or emphasizing the code, or in the final days, and he held this in reserve, though it is thought by historians of technology that the relay was the most essential and elegant contribution that Morse made to the problem of getting a message over a long distance. That crucial business of when you receive the message and you retransmit it, the relay electromagnetically does that instantaneously. You don't have to wait for someone to see, record, and register a message to be sent then off. And again, that big interval between sending and receiving in 100 stations could consume 3 or 4 hours just for the repetition. Well, the signal velocity would have made it practically instantaneously. So it was the repeater that I think, in Morse's mind, guaranteed the final success of whatever were going to be the problems, how much battery, how much wire, and how far we would be able to send signals.
And of course, if telegraph operators could just figure out what was coming in as a message just by listening to it, then obviously the content of messages could be hacked very easily. And every single manufacturer of any size created their own codes so that their messages wouldn't mean anything to anybody who listened in. Tamara.
Well, I'm sort of wondering where we are today. I recall sending telegrams in the late 1970s, and now, of course, we have the internet. Is the telegraph still being used, or a backup system for something happening to the internet? Where is it now?
I believe it would be very difficult for you to send and for someone to receive a transcribed electric message by telegraph. You can do so with money. I think the telegraphic services are still being used to order. They don't send the money, of course, by the wire, but to order a payment at the other end. I believe that the messaging aspect of the telegraph is.
And yes.
Just one more question.
One more. Yes.
Was Morse code used in early shipping or communications before they were using wired radio?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We referred to semaphore being used as in an earlier distance. Certainly the British Navy had means of signaling between ships, and James Parker's semaphore system was for ship-to-shore signaling. But after the Morse code was introduced, I don't know when it was introduced to marine signaling, but certainly by the wireless period, the late 1890s, early 1900s, the signaling across the oceans were in Morse code.
Thank you so much.